At 71 years old, I thought I had experienced everything life could offer. However, nothing prepared me for what my accountant revealed that cold February morning. He went pale, his hands began to shake, and those four words changed everything. Mrs. Henderson, we have a problem. My name is Patricia Henderson, and I am speaking to you today from my living room in Connecticut. Before I share what happened, I would like to know where you are watching from. Please drop your state or country in the comments. This story will take you on an unbelievable journey, and I need to know I'm not alone in this. It started innocently enough. My husband, Richard, and I had been married for 32 years. We met in our late 30s, both of us having focused on our careers before settling down. Richard was a commercial real estate broker, frequently traveling between New York, Florida, and the Carolinas. I was a nurse practitioner dedicated to my patients at Yale New Haven Hospital until I retired at 68. That February, I decided to take a proactive approach to our taxes. Richard always managed our finances, and I trusted him completely. However, after my friend Susan discovered costly tax errors made by her late husband, I thought it wise to have our accountant, James Morrison, review everything before I signed our joint return. James had been handling our taxes for 15 years. He was meticulous and professional, the kind of person who double-checked everything. When I entered his office that Tuesday morning, he greeted me with his usual warm smile. I handed him the tax documents Richard had prepared, along with our W-2s and investment statements. I mentioned that I just wanted a second pair of eyes on everything before signing, settling into the leather chair opposite his desk. Nothing major, just peace of mind. James nodded, pulling the documents toward him. Smart thinking, Patricia. Let me pull up your file history. I expected this to take about 20 minutes, but instead, his fingers stopped mid-keystroke. His eyes narrowed at the screen, and he began typing faster, clicking through what seemed like multiple windows. The color drained from his face. Is everything okay? I asked, feeling the first flutter of concern in my chest. He didn't respond. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and asked whoever answered to pull federal tax records for Richard Henderson, going back 25 years. His voice had changed, tight and controlled, as if he were trying hard to remain calm. James, you're scaring me. What's wrong? He held up one finger, still staring at his computer screen. Then he opened a filing cabinet, pulled out folders from previous years, and laid them across his desk. I watched him compare documents, his jaw tightening with each page. Finally, he looked up at me, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Mrs. Henderson, Patricia, I need you to stay calm. What I'm about to tell you will be very difficult to hear. My heart was pounding. Just tell me. Your husband has been filing married jointly with someone else. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that escaped before I could stop it. That's impossible. We file together every year. I sign the returns. James shook his head slowly, and I watched him age 10 years in that moment. Patricia, the returns you've been signing are real. You and Richard do file jointly, but according to the IRS database, Richard has also been filing married jointly with a woman named Vanessa Blackwood in Florida since 2001. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair, recognizing the signs of shock in my body. The ringing in my ears, the sudden coldness in my extremities, the way my vision narrowed to a tunnel. That's the year we got married, I whispered. I know, James said, coming around the desk and crouching beside my chair. Patricia, I need to tell you the rest. I've cross-referenced everything. This woman, Vanessa, is listed as the primary beneficiary on Richard's life insurance policy, on his retirement accounts, on everything. I couldn't breathe. 32 years of marriage, trust, and building a life together, all of it based on a lie. How is this even possible? How can someone file taxes twice? How can someone be married to two people? James explained gently. The IRS systems aren't perfectly cross-referenced, especially across state lines. Richard has been using your Connecticut address for his northern business interests and one set of returns, but he has a Florida address, an actual residence in Tampa, where he files completely separate returns with Vanessa. He's been committing tax fraud on a massive scale, not to mention bigamy. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My husband is a bigamist. James nodded, his expression full of pity that made me want to scream. Patricia, there's more. I've pulled property records. Richard owns that Tampa house jointly with Vanessa. It's worth about $800,000. There are also joint bank accounts, investment portfolios. He's built an entire separate financial life with her. I thought about all those business trips, 3, sometimes 4 times a month. Richard would fly to Florida for client meetings and property showings, gone for 4 or 5 days at a time. He'd call me every night, tell me about his day, say he missed me, and then go home. To her. How much? I asked, my voice hardening. How much money are we talking about? James pulled up a spreadsheet of combined assets he held jointly with Vanessa, approximately $2.4 million. That doesn't include what he has with you, which is about $1.8 million. Patricia, your husband has built 2 completely separate lives with 2 completely separate families for over 20 years. I stood up, my legs somehow steady despite everything crumbling around me. I need copies of everything. Every document, every bank statement, every tax return, every piece of evidence you can find. James was already pulling files. What are you going to do? I looked at him and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. I'm going to burn his entire world to the ground. I didn't go home that day. I couldn't face Richard. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my car in James' parking lot for an hour, staring at nothing, trying to absorb what I'd learned. Finally, I drove to Susan's house. Susan took one look at my face and pulled me inside. What happened? I told her everything, every word James had said, every document he'd shown me. When I finished, Susan gripped my hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. We're calling my daughter, she said. Right now. Susan's daughter, Jennifer, was a family law attorney in Hartford. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in her office laying out the entire situation. Jennifer listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Patricia, this is one of the most egregious cases of fraud I've ever encountered, she said when I finished. We're not just talking about bigamy, though that's a felony in Connecticut. We're talking about tax fraud, wire fraud, potentially identity theft if he's been forging your signature on any documents, and massive financial fraud. This man has been systematically deceiving you and the federal government for 2 decades. Can we get everything? All the money he's hidden with her? Jennifer leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. First, we say nothing to Richard. Not a word. We need to gather evidence without tipping him off, because the moment he knows you're aware, he could start moving assets or destroying documents. Second, I'm going to hire a private investigator, someone who specializes in financial fraud. We need to know everything, every account, every property, every asset he has anywhere in the country. How long will that take? 2 to 3 weeks if we're thorough. Can you pretend nothing's wrong for that long? I thought about it. 32 years of lies, and she was asking if I could lie for 3 weeks. Yes. Over the next 21 days, I became someone I didn't recognize. Every morning, I woke up beside Richard, kissed him goodbye, and watched him leave for work. I cooked dinners, laughed at his jokes, and even attended a charity gala with him, where he introduced me as his devoted wife to colleagues who probably knew the truth. But every afternoon, while Richard was at his office, I met with Jennifer and the private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Teresa Williams. Teresa compiled a dossier that was 3 inches thick. The Tampa house wasn't the only property. Richard owned a condo in Miami, a beach house in the Keys, and a vacation property in Asheville, all with Vanessa. They had joint accounts at 4 different banks and owned a boat. They had taken cruises to the Caribbean, Europe, and Alaska. There were photographs of them together at restaurants, weddings, and what looked like family gatherings. Vanessa was 58, a real estate agent who worked at Richard's firm. They had met at a conference in 1999. Looking at her pictures, I felt nothing. No jealousy, no rage. She was just another victim of Richard's lies, though she had to have known he was married to someone else. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe Richard had lied to her too, telling her I was dead or that we were divorced. That thought made it worse somehow. I want to know about her, I told Teresa during one of our afternoon meetings. Everything. Who is Vanessa Blackwood? Teresa opened another file. Vanessa Marie Blackwood, 58 years old, born in Jacksonville. She's been a real estate agent for 30 years, currently works at Prestige Properties, Richard's firm, no previous marriages, no children. Her parents are deceased. She has a sister in Georgia whom she sees a few times a year. I studied the surveillance photos Teresa had taken. Vanessa was attractive, tall, blonde, athletic. She played tennis at a country club and volunteered at an animal shelter. In the photos, she looked happy, laughing at something Richard had said, her hand on his arm. Does she know about me? We think so, Teresa said carefully. We track their communication patterns. Richard maintains two completely separate phones, one for his Connecticut life, one for Florida, but there are patterns in his behavior. He's never in Tampa for major holidays. He's never there for your birthday or anniversary. Vanessa would have to notice that. Jennifer added, We pulled their marriage certificate. They were married in Key West in January 2001. It's a legal marriage. Richard used his real name and social security number. He just never divorced you first. So my marriage isn't legal? No, your marriage is legal. You married him first in 1992. His marriage to Vanessa is invalid because you can't be married to two people. But here's the thing. Florida doesn't have common law marriage. So Vanessa has been living with Richard all these years, thinking she's legally married when she's not. I felt a strange pang of sympathy for Vanessa. She'd been lied to just as completely as I had. Does she think he travels for work too? Yes. According to our intel, she believes Richard spends most of his time in New York, managing the company's northern properties. She thinks his frequent absences are business trips. He told us both the same lie, just in reverse. I felt sick. Teresa pulled out more documents. Patricia, we need to discuss something difficult. We've been monitoring Richard's communications. 3 weeks ago, he refinanced the Tampa house. He pulled out $500,000 in equity. That money isn't in any account we can find. The room went cold. He knows. Somehow, he knows I'm investigating. We don't think so, Jennifer said quickly. His behavior hasn't changed at all, but we think he might be planning something. Maybe he's preparing to leave both of you, take the money and run. Or maybe he's planning to kill me, I said flatly without emotion. If I die, he gets the life insurance, the Connecticut house, everything. And Vanessa never needs to know I existed. Jennifer and Teresa exchanged glances. We've considered that possibility, Jennifer admitted, which is why we're accelerating our timeline. We have enough evidence now. It's time to act. I looked at the stack of files on the table, proof of every lie, every betrayal, every crime Richard had committed. What do I need to do? Tomorrow morning, we're going to the police and the FBI, Jennifer said. Tax fraud across state lines is a federal crime. So is wire fraud. And Connecticut prosecutes bigamy as a felony with up to 5 years in prison. But tonight, we need to get you somewhere safe. I'm not leaving my house. Patricia, that's my home. I'm not the one who should leave. I didn't follow Jennifer's advice. Maybe I should have, but 32 years of rage had built up inside me, and I wanted Richard to see my face when his world collapsed. That evening, I cooked dinner, his favorite pot roast with roasted vegetables. I set the table with our good china and even opened a bottle of wine. When Richard came home at 6:30, he kissed my cheek as he had thousands of times before. Something smells amazing. What's the occasion? No occasion, I said, smiling. Just wanted to do something nice. We ate dinner, making small talk. Richard told me about a difficult client, about traffic on I-95, about plans to play golf that weekend. I nodded, asked questions, and refilled his wine glass. I was calm, eerily calm. After dinner, as Richard relaxed in his chair with his second glass of wine, I placed a manila folder on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." He did. I watched his face as he saw the first document, a copy of his tax return filed jointly with Vanessa Blackwood. His expression froze. His fingers stopped moving. "Patricia, keep going," I said. "There's more." He flipped through the pages. His marriage certificate to Vanessa, bank statements showing joint accounts, property deeds, photographs of him with her at restaurants, on beaches, at parties. His face went from pale to gray to almost green. "I can explain." "Explain," I said, my voice icy. "You're going to explain 23 years of bigamy, 23 years of tax fraud, the $2.4 million you've hidden with your other wife while I worked night shifts at the hospital so we could save for retirement." Richard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Patricia, please just listen. I'm done listening. I've listened to your lies for 32 years. Do you know what today is, Richard? It's March 15th. Do you know what happened on March 15th, 23 years ago? He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You married her while you were married to me. You flew to Key West and married another woman. And then you came home and took me out for our anniversary dinner, like nothing had happened. If you're watching this and feeling as angry as I was in that moment, please hit that subscribe button because what happened next? Justice was finally served, and you need to hear how this ends. Richard's hands were shaking. It just happened. We fell in love, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. So, you committed multiple felonies instead? You built an entire second life. You made me sign tax returns that were fraudulent. You put all your assets in her name so I'd have nothing. That's not, he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the FBI and the Connecticut State Police. They're very interested in your creative approach to taxes and marriage. Jennifer estimates you're facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Connecticut wants to prosecute you for bigamy. The IRS wants their money, all of it, plus penalties. Richard collapsed back into his chair. You can't do this. I'm your husband. I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet. No, Richard, you stopped being my husband 23 years ago when you married someone else. That night, Richard slept in the guest room, or tried to. I heard him pacing until 3 a.m. I didn't sleep either, but not because of fear or sadness. I was planning. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Jennifer arrived with 2 FBI agents and a Connecticut State Police detective. Richard answered the door in his bathrobe, his face haggard from lack of sleep. Richard Henderson? The detective asked. Yes, you're under arrest for bigamy, tax fraud, and wire fraud. I watched from the living room as they read him his rights and put him in handcuffs. Richard looked at me, his eyes pleading. Patricia, please don't do this. We can work this out. I said nothing. I just watched as they led him out of our house, my house, and into a police car. The next 72 hours were a blur. The FBI seized Richard's computers, files, and phone records. They froze all his accounts, both the ones with me and the ones with Vanessa. Jennifer filed for an emergency divorce, asking for full dissolution of the marriage and all assets. 3 days after Richard's arrest, I received a call from a Florida number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Henderson? The voice was female, shaky. This is Vanessa Blackwood. I think we need to talk. My first instinct was to hang up, but curiosity won. I'm listening. The FBI came to my house yesterday. They told me about you, that Richard was married to you when he married me, that my marriage isn't legal, that everything we built together is fraud. I felt that strange sympathy again. You didn't know? No, she laughed, a bitter sound. No, I didn't know. He told me he was divorced. He showed me papers. They must have been fake. He said his ex-wife lived in California and they never spoke. I thought, God, I'm so stupid. I thought I was building a life with my husband. You're not stupid. He's a talented liar. There was silence on the line. Then Vanessa said, the FBI agent told me you're the legal wife, that you get everything, the Connecticut assets, half of what we built in Florida, all of it. Is that true? My attorney is working on it, but yes, that's what we're fighting for. Good. Her voice was firm now. Take it all, every penny. He doesn't deserve anything. Mrs. Henderson, Patricia, I'm so sorry. I never would have if I'd known. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. Vanessa, you're a victim too. He stole 23 years from both of us. What's going to happen to him? He's being charged with multiple federal felonies. His bail hearing is tomorrow. Jennifer thinks he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum, plus massive fines and restitution to the IRS. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Good. He deserves every second of it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for a man who was living an entire secret life. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, never that, but closure. I understood that Richard's betrayal wasn't about me being insufficient or unlovable. It was about him being broken. The next morning, I attended Richard's bail hearing. Jennifer had filed a motion opposing bail, arguing that Richard was a flight risk with access to hidden assets and a history of sophisticated fraud. The courtroom was packed. Richard sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller, somehow diminished. His attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer from New York, argued passionately that Richard was a respected businessman with deep community ties who posed no flight risk. Then Jennifer stood up. Your Honor, the defendant maintains residences in 5 different states under different names and arrangements. He has been successfully deceiving his family, his business associates, and the federal government for 23 years. He has demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of how to hide assets and evade detection. Just 3 weeks before his arrest, he refinanced a property and withdrew $500,000 that we still cannot locate. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at Richard over her glasses. Where is that money, Mr. Henderson? Richard's attorney leaned over to whisper to him. Richard shook his head. I don't have to answer that. Actually, the judge said, you do. This court needs to assess your financial resources to determine bail. Where is the $500,000? I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me. The judge's expression hardened. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. Richard's face went white. Your Honor, please. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Henderson from contacting either Patricia Henderson or Vanessa Blackwood, and I'm freezing all assets pending resolution of the civil suit. This court is adjourned. As the bailiff led Richard away, he looked back at me one last time. I met his eyes and felt nothing. No love, no hate, no regret, just relief that this chapter was finally closing. Over the next 6 months, the legal proceedings unfolded with devastating precision. The FBI built an airtight case showing Richard had defrauded the IRS of over $400,000 in taxes. They proved he had used wire transfers to move money between accounts to hide assets. They documented every lie, every fake identity, every fraudulent filing. Jennifer filed a massive civil suit claiming all assets in both marriages. Connecticut is not a community property state, she explained in one of our meetings. But we can argue fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're going after everything: the Connecticut house, his retirement accounts, his life insurance, and half of everything he bought with Vanessa using marital assets that should have been yours. Vanessa, through her own attorney, filed a similar suit. We weren't working together exactly, but we weren't working against each other either. We were both victims of the same con man. In August, Richard's criminal trial began. I attended every day of the 3-week proceedings. I listened to federal agents testify about the elaborate fraud. I watched as they displayed charts showing the flow of money between accounts, the property purchases, the double life he had maintained with such careful precision. The prosecution presented evidence that Richard had spent over $200,000 of our money from our joint accounts, on Vanessa, jewelry, vacations, the down payment on the Tampa house, money I had earned working night shifts at the hospital, money we were supposed to be saving for retirement, spent on his other wife. Richard's defense was pathetic. His attorney argued that bigamy was a victimless crime, that Richard had provided for both families, that he had made mistakes but shouldn't be punished so harshly. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On the count of wire fraud, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the count of tax fraud, guilty. On the count of bigamy, guilty. I watched Richard's shoulders slump as the guilty verdicts kept coming. 7 counts total. 7 times the word guilty echoed through that courtroom. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but Richard just stared straight ahead, his face blank. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, the civil suits moved forward. Jennifer had assembled an incredible case showing how Richard had systematically stolen from our marriage to build his Florida life. He used your credit, she explained in one of our meetings. When he bought that Tampa house in 2003, he used credit that was built on your combined financial history. He used tax returns that included your income to qualify for loans. He used money from accounts you contributed to. Legally, Vanessa has no claim to those assets because the money used to purchase them was obtained through fraud. but I surprised Jennifer with my next decision. I want to split Florida assets with Vanessa 50-50. Jennifer blinked. Patricia, legally, you're entitled to everything. Vanessa has no legal claim. I know, but she lost 23 years too. She lost her chance to have a real marriage, maybe have children, build a legitimate life. Richard stole from both of us. I'm not going to compound that by taking everything from her. Jennifer studied me for a long moment. You're a better person than most people would be in this situation. I'm not being noble. I just want this finished. I want to move on with whatever life I have left, and I can't do that carrying guilt about destroying another victim. The sentencing hearing arrived in October. The judge had reviewed pre-sentencing reports, victim impact statements from both me and Vanessa, and stacks of financial documents showing the scope of Richard's fraud. I stood at the podium to deliver my victim impact statement. Richard sat 20 feet away, forced to listen. Your Honor, I met Richard Henderson when I was 39 years old. I spent my 20s and 30s building my career as a nurse practitioner, caring for others, making a difference. When I met Richard, I thought I had finally found my partner for the second half of my life. I trusted him completely. I let him handle our finances. I supported his career. I worked extra shifts so we could save for retirement. And for 32 years, I believed we were building a life together. What I didn't know was that I was funding his other life. The money I earned during night shifts at the hospital, taking care of sick patients, missing sleep, sacrificing my health, that money went to buy jewelry for Vanessa, to make down payments on vacation homes, to fund cruises and fancy dinners and a lifestyle I never got to enjoy. Richard didn't just betray my trust. He stole my time, my money, and my future. I'm 71 years old now. I can't get those years back. I can't rebuild the retirement savings he squandered. I can't undo the emotional trauma of discovering that my entire marriage was a lie. I paused, looking directly at Richard. His eyes were red, but I felt no sympathy. But what hurts most, Your Honor, is the betrayal of trust. Every time Richard kissed me goodbye and said, I love you, before leaving for Florida, he was lying. Every anniversary dinner, every holiday, every quiet evening at home, all of it was contaminated by his deception. He looked me in the eye every single day and chose to lie to me. I ask this court to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law, not for revenge, but for justice. Richard Henderson is a criminal who deliberately, systematically, and without remorse committed fraud against his family, his partners, and his country for over 2 decades. He needs to be held accountable. I sat down. Vanessa delivered her statement next, equally powerful, equally devastating. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Henderson, I've been on the bench for 28 years. I've seen many cases of fraud, deception, and betrayal, but the scope and duration of your crimes are extraordinary. You didn't make a mistake. You didn't have a momentary lapse in judgment. You constructed and maintained an elaborate deception for 23 years. You committed crimes against your wives, against the IRS, against the financial system itself. The pre-sentencing report indicates you show no genuine remorse. Your attorney's arguments suggest you still don't understand the gravity of what you've done. You seem to believe this is a private matter between you and your families, not a serious crime against society. You are wrong. On the federal charges of wire fraud and tax fraud, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison. On the state charge of bigamy, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison. To run consecutively, that's a total of 17 years. You will also pay restitution to the IRS in the amount of $473,000 plus penalties and interest. You will pay court-ordered settlements to both Patricia Henderson and Vanessa Blackwood in amounts to be determined by the civil proceedings. Richard's face was ashen. 17 years. He was 66 years old. He'd be 83 when he got out, if he lived that long. The civil settlements came through 3 months later. The Connecticut house was mine, free and clear. Richard's name was removed from the deed. My retirement accounts and life insurance, everything that had been jointly held in Connecticut, came entirely to me. That totaled about $1.8 million. The Florida assets were more complicated. The court ruled that because Richard had used marital funds obtained fraudulently to purchase Florida properties, those assets were tainted. Jennifer negotiated a settlement. The Tampa house, the Miami condo, and associated accounts would be liquidated. After Richard's restitution to the IRS, the remainder would be split equally between Vanessa and me. That came to an additional $900,000 for me and a similar amount for Vanessa. I also received a portion of Richard's pension from his real estate firm, the portion he'd earned during our marriage. His business partners, horrified by the fraud, immediately terminated him and cooperated fully with investigators. In total, I recovered about $2.7 million, everything Richard had stolen from me, plus compensation for damages. Vanessa got enough to rebuild her life, buy a modest home, and retire with dignity. Richard got a prison cell. On a cold morning in January, I stood in my kitchen now, my house, my life, and made coffee. Through the window, I could see my garden, dormant for winter but ready to bloom again in spring. It had been 8 months since Richard's sentencing, 8 months since I walked out of that courtroom knowing justice had been served. The legal battles were finished, the money was secured, the betrayer was in prison where he belonged. People ask me how I'm doing. They expect me to be broken, devastated, and unable to trust again. But here's what I learned. Richard's betrayal wasn't about me. It wasn't because I was insufficient or unlovable or lacking in some way. It was about his own brokenness, his greed, his cowardice. I spent 32 years being a good wife to someone who didn't deserve it. That wasn't wasted time. I was still myself during those years. I still saved lives as a nurse. I still had friendships, hobbies, and interests. Richard was part of my life, but he wasn't all of it. Now at 71, I have my freedom back. I have financial security better than I would have had if Richard had been honest because the courts punished him for his crimes. I have my self-respect. I have truth. I've reconnected with old friends I lost touch with during my marriage. I joined a book club. I'm planning a trip to Italy with Susan next spring, something I always wanted to do, but Richard always had excuses for why we couldn't. Vanessa sent me a card last month. She's doing well too. She bought a small house in Sarasota, adopted 2 dogs, and started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. Helping other women recognize the warning signs I missed, she wrote, trying to make something good come from all this pain. I don't hate her. How could I? We were both victims of the same predator. In a strange way, we survived this together. As for Richard, he's in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I don't think about him often. When I do, I feel pity more than anger. He destroyed 2 marriages, lost his freedom, ruined his reputation, and for what? He'll die in prison alone, with nothing to show for 70-plus years of life except a legacy of lies. What a waste. But I'm not wasted. I'm here, I'm free, I'm whole. If you're watching this and you've experienced betrayal, maybe not on this scale, but betrayal nonetheless, I want you to know something. It's not your fault. The person who lies, who cheats, who steals, they make that choice. You didn't cause it by being imperfect or insufficient. You can't prevent it by being more vigilant or more loving. What you can do is survive it. Gather your evidence, get good lawyers, fight for what's yours, and then move forward. Don't let someone else's betrayal define the rest of your life. I'm Patricia Henderson. I'm 71 years old. My husband was a bigamist and a criminal. But I'm not defined by what he did to me. I'm defined by how I responded with strength, clarity, and an absolute refusal to be destroyed by his choices. And that, my friends, is how you reclaim your life. Please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video with love and respect.